In previous videos in this series, I charted your move up the organization using the scope chart as a guide. In this video, we'll look at what the view looks like from those various positions. It's easy for leaders to forget the blind spots in their own perception, even more difficult to see how others perceive them, and that leads to a lot of missteps. I can help you with the use of the scope chart. This is the 9th video in my series on scope, the perspective of your role in the organization. We're looking at scope through the scope chart that I introduced in the first video in this series. If you need a refresher or missed that first video, you might want to start there. Regardless of your position in an organization or your place on the scope chart, as you move, your view changes. Your perception of the organization changes to a longer and larger view. And the organization's perception of you changes as you retreat into the upper echelons of the organization. Let's look at them both. When you move up in an organization, your perception changes. That is, in fact, what this whole series has been about. How the scope of your thinking needs to change as you advance. But there are two effects of this move. As your scope expands to a larger and larger swath, you, by necessity, lose sight of the details. You can see this on the scope chart. At one level up, you can't see the days. You lose sight of the individual people. At 2 levels removed, you lose sight of those people. Further up, it becomes a blur. You need to find ways to keep in touch with the details, with the people, with the day-to-day work, just to remain fresh, and also to be certain you remain relevant, and that you're not making decisions that trample on the details. You also can't just assume the details will happen per plan, but you also can't micromanage. This is probably the most difficult challenge in management, how to remain in touch with the details while simultaneously letting go of them, how to delegate and trust in that delegation. Every successful leader figures this out in their own way. They find a way to balance it. Some do periodic deep dive reviews. They pull together all the people working on some specific area and plunge far into the details. They ask hard questions, get deep into the numbers. The good leaders listen a lot in these sessions. Through this, they remain up to date on the details, and they ensure that the team working on those details keep the important larger picture of the division or the company in focus. But these reviews are expensive, both in time and in morale. The team being reviewed will prepare for days for the meeting. They'll fret over every word of their presentation, sweat over what details are relevant, what are not, worry about the nitpicking questions the leader might ask, and afterwards they'll spend days debriefing and deciding what to do about the issues raised, often laying waste to plans and schedules that were months in the making. These reviews take a heavy toll on the team's morale. They ask themselves, why them? Why are they being reviewed? Is something wrong? In advance, they lie awake at night for days or weeks worrying about potential missteps. Afterward, they replay time and again every word spoken, every slight criticism, every utterance from on high, reading of tea leaves in everything and everyone around the table. Deep dives often feel like micromanagement of the worst form. Not just random strikes from above, but planned bomber raids. You have to ask yourself if the knowledge gained for the leader is worth the cost. Other leaders use spies to understand what's going on in their organization. They have a few trusted people working deep in the team that they can pull aside and inquire about the state of things. This is fraught with issues from the bias of the observer to the resentment of the team and the overall quality of the information. And then, of course, the spies are often known to the team and they're intentionally kept in the dark. In any case, using spies certainly isn't an open and transparent way to understand what's going on. For me, my favorite technique has always been MBWA, management by walking around, wandering the halls and dropping in on people to understand what they're doing. Quick, informal chats to see how things are going, understand the work at the detail level, and uncover festering issues. In the days of remote work, that's become the, hey, do you got a couple minutes Zoom call. A chance to hear honest and unrehearsed input from a variety of people in the organization. While this is great for an unvarnished view, it's also obtrusive and not respective of their time. You end up behaving like you own their time, to say nothing of the panic that ensues from a random message from above entitled, "Hey, you got a minute?" But if you do it promptly or on the fly or at most later that day, it can work. Don't ask someone for a quick call for next week. They'll lie awake for days. Maybe even polish up their resume because of everything they worry about. If you schedule in advance, be sure to say, "There are no issues, I simply want to hear from you how things are going." The best way to ensure that these random interactions stay drama-free is to do them a lot. If you're always seen doing it, it becomes unexceptional. So that many people can relate that story. Yeah, he came by, we had a good chat. And it becomes routine and less worrisome. And you'll get a variety of information at many levels that's always fresh. However you choose to do it, it's important for you to counteract the natural limitations of your place on the scope chart. You can't always live in your bubble up there and expect to understand in any detail what's happening way down here. Perhaps the most difficult thing for many managers to grasp is others' perceptions of them. Some are oblivious to it, others stress about it to no end. Those who ignore the image people have of them are often the most damaged by it. Those who worry incessantly about it often overreact and appear artificial. It's a difficult balance. The issue is clearly drawn on the scope chart. The senior executive up here is many steps removed from those down near the bottom. Even just one step away distances them sufficiently to cause mystery and uncertainty. The further up the chart you go, the more steps in between, the more mysterious you become. This causes a spiral of degradation. As we discussed in the third video, those near the bottom assume because they don't see you that you're clueless, that you couldn't possibly understand what they're going through. They often ascribe any negative outcomes to willful malice. The less they know about you, the more they fill in ulterior motives. Lacking any other information, the bad is assumed. They assume that that layoff was because you're trying to suppress wages, or the cancellation of that project is due to bribes that you've received, or that anything that happens anywhere in the organization is political with little real business purpose. A common tactic of many senior leaders when faced with this is to pretend to be just like one of them, but with a bigger title, to be just one of the gang. But that never rings true. You aren't one of them. You have many more people working for you. You handle far bigger issues. You make far more money. They know that. They aren't fooled by this everyman shtick, so don't try it. This is also a risk when doing MBWA. You can't pretend to be one of the gang when chatting with people. You can't hang at the coffee bar. They know that's not the case. So own your position, own your role in the company, fully occupy your space on the scope chart, but do everything in your power to remain connected. And remain connected by communication. There are 3 keys to that communication. 1, you have to tell them what you're thinking. A lot. Talk down through the scope chart. Don't let them wonder what's on your mind. Tell them. One place where many managers stumble here is on the need for repetition. They say, I've told everyone what our plan is, what the vision is, when in reality they had a couple of meetings a month ago where it was discussed. You need to let everyone know precisely what is important over and over again. You have to leave absolutely no doubt that this is the vision and it's our number one priority. You have to stay rigorously consistent in that message and repeat it over and over and over until you can't repeat it anymore, and then repeat it a few more times. 2, you have to listen a lot. Hear up through the scope chart. Don't give anyone any reason to suspect you're clueless. As we discussed above, you have to find a way to hear the truth about what's going on in your organization. Not just the KPIs, but the reality, the truth, ugly or not. And 3, you have to be real. You have to be open and honest. You have to admit mistakes as much as celebrate successes. That's the only way to combat the cynicism that distance on the scope chart naturally brings. They have to believe what you're saying, believe that you're listening, believe that you're human. That comes from being real, open, and honest. If you communicate like this, up and down the scope chart, you can fundamentally improve the perception others have of you in a genuine way that will last forever through good times and bad. In the final video in this series, we'll look at how perspective and the scope chart is deeply tied to the most essential leadership element, the vision. But that's next time. Be sure to subscribe to my channel and click the bell so you won't miss each new video in this series. I'll see you the next time as we wrap up the series with Scope and Vision.